The city of New York was drenched in rain the day Richard Dawson, the legendary founder of Dawson Enterprises, passed away. His sudden death was announced on every major news channel, shocking the financial world. Richard had built his empire from the ground up, transforming Dawson Enterprises into one of the largest real estate conglomerates in the United States. At the Grand Dawson Mansion in Upper East Side, the atmosphere was thick with grief and whispers. The funeral was a grand affair. Business tycoons, politicians, and social elites filled the grand hall to pay their respects. Among the crowd stood Michael Dawson, Richard's only son, who had flown back from London after receiving the devastating news. He stood silently by his father's casket, his hands clenched tightly, his gaze fixed and unwavering. But the whispers were not about Michael. They were about the woman standing next to him, Victoria Hayes, Richard's second wife. Victoria was elegant and poised, her dark hair pulled back flawlessly, her face a mask of restrained sorrow. Though she was nearly 20 years younger than Richard, she had married him 5 years ago after a whirlwind romance that had stunned many in high society. As the last mourners paid their respects, Victoria stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor. She placed a delicate white rose on Richard's casket and whispered something that only Michael, standing close by, could hear. "He always trusted me. He always did." Michael's jaw clenched. He barely knew Victoria. He had been away in London managing his own business ventures since she entered his father's life. But there was something about her calm demeanor that unsettled him. It felt calculated, almost rehearsed. 2 days later, the family gathered at Dawson Tower, the headquarters of Dawson Enterprises, for the reading of the will. Michael arrived early, accompanied by Jack Miller, the family lawyer who had served Richard for over 2 decades. "Jack, what do you know about this?" Michael asked as they entered the private conference room. Jack adjusted his glasses, his expression unreadable. "Not much, I'm afraid. Your father made some adjustments to his estate plan a few months ago. He didn't share many details." Michael frowned. "Ajustements? What kind of adjustments?" Before Jack could answer, Victoria walked in, dressed impeccably in a black dress that seemed tailored specifically for the occasion. Behind her were 2 men in suits, her personal lawyers. She smiled at Michael, her eyes gleaming with something he couldn't quite place. "Michael," she greeted him smoothly, "I'm glad you could make it." Michael nodded curtly. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The room settled into silence as Jack began reading the will. Richard's voice echoed in Michael's mind, memories of his father's laughter, his stern guidance, and his unyielding ambition. But those memories were shattered by the words that left Jack's mouth. "To my beloved wife Victoria Hayes, I leave full managerial control of Dawson Enterprises, along with 51% of all shares." Michael's head snapped up. "What?" Jack continued, his voice steady despite the shock that had clearly spread across his face. "To my son, Michael Dawson, I leave the remaining 49% of the company shares, and the property in Long Island." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. His father had promised him, Dawson Enterprises was to be his legacy. He had been groomed for it since he was a child, shadowing Richard in board meetings, learning every aspect of the company. "This couldn't be right." "That's impossible," Michael interrupted, his voice sharp. "My father would never." Victoria leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs gracefully. "Your father trusted me to lead, Michael. He knew I had the vision and the strength to continue his legacy." Michael stared at her, his fists clenched. "You manipulated him," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't know how, but you did." Victoria's smile didn't falter. "Michael," she whispered, leaning in, "sometimes trust is stronger than blood." Jack placed the will back into his briefcase, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "This is legally binding. If you wish to contest it, Michael, we would need substantial evidence." Michael stood abruptly, the chair screeching against the polished floor. His eyes locked onto Victoria's. "I'm going to find out what you did," he promised, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "And when you do, you'll lose everything." Victoria's smile finally faded, replaced by a steely gaze. "Good luck," she replied. "You're going to need it." Michael stormed out of the room, his mind reeling with disbelief and rage. Jack followed closely behind, his footsteps hurried to match Michael's. "What are you planning to do?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael stopped abruptly in the hallway, turning to face him. "I'm going to find out the truth," he declared. "And I'm going to take back what's mine." Jack placed a firm hand on Michael's shoulder. "You know it's not going to be easy. Victoria has deep connections. It won't just be a legal battle, it'll be a war."
Michael's eyes blazed with determination.
"Then it's a war I'm ready to fight."
The city lights of New York glittered outside the glass windows, reflecting of Michael's determined face.
He had lost his father, but he would not lose his legacy. Not to her. Michael Dawson stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, looking out over the city lights that flickered like distant stars. His reflection stared back at him, eyes hardened with determination. He replayed the events of the will reading over and over in his mind, dissecting every word, every glance, every smirk on Victoria's face. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. His father had always been transparent with him, discussing business deals and strategic expansions. Richard Dawson was a man of principle, someone who believed in legacy and family. Handing over the reins of Dawson Enterprises to Victoria, a woman who had only been in his life for 5 years, was entirely out of character. Michael poured himself a glass of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the light as he swirled it slowly. He took a long sip, letting the warmth burn down his throat. His mind drifted back to his last phone call with his father, just 2 weeks before his death. Richard had sounded tired but optimistic. He spoke about restructuring the company, expanding investments in renewable energy, and strengthening ties with international partners. There was no mention of retirement, no hint of weakness. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Michael turned to see Jack Miller stepping into the room, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing his usual stern expression. "Thought you might want to see this," Jack said, placing the briefcase on the coffee table and unlocking it with a swift motion. He pulled out a stack of documents, laying them neatly in front of Michael.
"What is this?"
Michael asked, eyebrows furrowed. "Medical records," Jack replied, his voice low. "I pulled some strings. These are your father's last 6 months of health reports." Michael grabbed the papers, scanning through them quickly. His eyes caught on the list of prescriptions: diazepam, lorazepam, temazepam, all heavy sedatives. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "My father was never on these kinds of medications." Jack nodded, his face grave. "According to these records, he was." The prescriptions were signed off by Dr. Simon Harris, the family physician. Michael's grip on the papers tightened.
Dr. Harris.
He was always close with Victoria. She insisted on him when my father first got sick. Jack leaned back, his fingers tapping thoughtfully on the armrest. "I did some digging. Dr. Harris has been practicing for nearly 30 years, but his clinic has been struggling financially. That changed about 2 years ago. Suddenly, he's got new equipment, expanded facilities, even hired more staff.
All of it coincide with the time Victoria married your father." Michael's eyes darkened with realization.
"You think she paid him off?" Jack hesitated before responding. "It's not just that. I believe she may have been controlling your father through these medications. High doses of sedatives can impair judgment, make someone more suggestible."
The room fell silent, tension crackling in the air.
Michael paced back and forth, his hands running through his hair. "So she drugged him? Kept him under control, forced him to sign away everything?" Jack nodded slowly. "It's possible. But we need more proof. Medical records are just the beginning. We need witnesses, financial trails, anything that ties her to this manipulation." Michael paused, his jaw clenched. "Mrs. Turner," he said suddenly. Jack looked up. "Who?" "She was the housekeeper for my father for nearly 20 years. She left just a few months before he died. No one explained why." Jack's eyes lit up with interest.
"Think she knows something."
Michael finished his glass of bourbon with one swallow, the fire in his eyes igniting. "If there's anyone who would know what happened in that house, it's her." The next morning, Michael and Jack drove out to a modest suburban neighborhood in New Jersey. Mrs. Turner's address was scribbled on a notepad, and Michael stared at it as Jack navigated the winding streets. "Are you sure she'll talk to us?" Jack asked, keeping his eyes on the road. Michael nodded. "She was loyal to my father."
"If she knows anything, she'll tell me."
They pulled up in front of a quaint two-story house with neatly trimmed hedges and blooming roses lining the path. Michael stepped out, straightened his coat, and marched up to the door. He knocked firmly, and after a few moments, the door creaked open. Mrs. Turner stood before them, older than Michael remembered, but her eyes were still sharp. She blinked in surprise, her hand instinctively clutching the edge of the door.
Michael?
My goodness, I didn't expect to see you. Michael offered a soft smile. I'm sorry for coming unannounced, Mrs. Turner. I was hoping we could talk about my father. Her expression faltered, and she looked behind her nervously. I don't know if that's a good idea. Michael took a step forward, lowering his voice. Please. I just need the truth. Whatever happened to him?
I need to know.
Mrs. Turner hesitated, glancing at Jack and then back to Michael. Finally, she sighed and opened the door wider. Come in, she said softly. Michael and Jack stepped inside, and Mrs. Turner led them to a cozy living room filled with family portraits and old furniture. She poured them tea and sat across from them, her hands folded tightly. What do you want to know? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady. Everything, he replied.
You want to know everything.
Mrs. Turner looked down at her hands, her eyes brimming with tears. Your father, he wasn't well, Michael. He was getting weaker by the day. But it wasn't natural. Michael's heart pounded in his chest. What do you mean? Mrs. Turner took a shaky breath.
Victoria, she controlled everything.
His medicine, his schedule, who he could see. It was as if she isolated him from the world. Jack exchanged a glance with Michael, his expression firm. We need you to tell us everything you saw, he urged. Mrs. Turner nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. I will, she said. But you have to promise me, you'll bring justice for him. Michael reached out, his hand covering hers. I promise, he whispered.
I won't stop until I do.
Mrs. Turner's hands trembled as she held the cup of tea, the liquid sloshing gently against the rim. Her eyes darted around the room as if expecting Victoria to burst through the door at any moment. Michael leaned forward, his gaze steady and unyielding. It's okay, Mrs. Turner, he reassured her.
You're Saphir. I need you to tell me everything you know about what happened to my father.
She took a deep breath, setting the cup down carefully on the table. I don't know where to begin, she murmured, her voice strained with years of silence. Start from the beginning, Jack encouraged, his notepad already in hand. When did you first notice things changing? Mrs. Turner clasped her hands tightly, knuckles white. It all started about 2 years ago, she began. When Mr. Dawson married Victoria, everything seemed fine at first. She was charming, polite. But after a few months, she began to change things around the house. She dismissed most of the old staff, brought in her own people. The chef, the gardener, even the security team, all replaced. Michael frowned. I remember the staff changes. I thought it was just to modernize things. Mrs. Turner shook her head. No, it was to control things.
She wanted absolute control.
And your father, he just went along with it. At first, I thought it was his choice, but then I noticed the medicine. Jack's pen stopped moving. The medicine? He asked carefully. Mrs. Turner nodded. Yes. Before Victoria, your father was healthy. He took a few vitamins, maybe some blood pressure pills. But after she came, she insisted he start taking more things. She said it was to help him sleep, to ease his mind. Michael's jaw clenched. And my father just agreed? Mrs. Turner looked down, her hands wringing together. He trusted her. She would bring him his tea every night, and I saw her crush pills into it. At first, I thought it was harmless, but he started changing. Jack leaned in, his voice low.
What kind of change?
He became forgetful, she whispered. At first, it was small things, like where he left his keys or what meetings he had. But then, he started forgetting people. He would look at me like I was a stranger. And he grew weaker, so much weaker. Michael's heart pounded, the realization settling in. And no one did anything? No one questioned it. Mrs. Turner sighed, her shoulders sagging. I tried. I spoke to Dr. Harris, but he said it was all part of aging. Victoria made sure no one questioned her authority. She fired me after I started asking too many questions. Said I was no longer fit for the job. Michael slammed his fist onto the table, the cups rattling. Damn it. She isolated him. She poisoned him right under everyone's nose. Jack placed a calming hand on Michael's shoulder. We have what we need, he said firmly. But we need proof.
Testimony 1T9.
We need records, documents, anything to tie Victoria to this. Mrs. Turner hesitated before speaking again. I might know where to look, she whispered. Michael and Jack turned to her, eyes wide with anticipation. Victoria had a private study, Mrs. Turner continued. It was in the east wing of the mansion. She always kept it locked, but I saw her go in and out with files and documents. She kept a safe there. I overheard her once, telling Dr. Harris that everything important was secure and untouchable. Michael's eyes sparked with determination. We need to get in there. Jack rubbed his chin thoughtfully. If it's locked and she's always there, we're going to need access. Breaking in won't be easy, especially with her security around. Michael didn't flinch. Then we find a way. If that safe has the proof we need, I'm not stopping until I get it. Mrs. Turner hesitated, then reached for her purse. She rummaged through it before pulling out a small brass key. Before I was fired, I made a copy, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't just leave without a way back in. Michael took the key, his hands shaking slightly. Thank you, he said sincerely. You've done more for my father than anyone else. Tears welled up in Mrs. Turner's eyes.
Il loved Monsieur Dawson.
He was a good man. He didn't deserve any of this. Jack stood up, tucking his notepad into his briefcase. We need to act fast, he stated. If Victoria catches wind of what we're doing, she'll destroy any evidence before we can get our hands on it. Michael nodded firmly.
We go tonight.
Jack's eyes widened slightly.
Tonight?
Are you sure? Michael's gaze was steely. Every second we wait is another second she has to cover her tracks. I won't let her win, Jack. Not this time. Mrs. Turner placed a hand on Michael's arm. Please, be careful.
She's more dangerous than you think.
Michael met her gaze, unyielding. So am I, he replied. That night, Michael and Jack drove back to the Dawson estate. The mansion loomed against the night sky, its towering windows reflecting the pale moonlight. The estate was quiet, security lights casting long shadows across the courtyard. Michael parked the car a block away, both men slipping out into the shadows. Jack handed Michael a pair of gloves. We're not getting caught, understand? Michael nodded, slipping on the gloves. We get in, get the documents, and get out.
Quick and clean.
Jack pulled out a small flashlight, nodding towards the eastern side of the mansion. That's the study. If Mrs. Turner is right, the safe is inside. Michael gripped the brass key tightly, his heart pounding with adrenaline. Let's finish this, he whispered. They moved silently across the lawn, the towering silhouette of Dawson Mansion standing like a sentinel in the dark. Michael's mind raced with thoughts of his father, of all the promises Richard Dawson had made to him. He wasn't just fighting for a company, he was fighting for his family's legacy. And tonight, he would uncover the truth. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as people filled the benches, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the high-profile case that had gripped New York's elite. Reporters lined the back wall, cameras flashing every few seconds. At the center of it all stood Michael Dawson, his shoulders squared, his gaze fixed forward. Beside him was Jack Miller, carrying a briefcase filled with evidence they had gathered, testimonies, medical records, and photographs. Across the aisle sat Victoria Hayes, impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect twist. Her expression was serene, almost amused, as if this were merely another business meeting. Beside her was Benjamin Cross, one of Manhattan's most expensive defense attorneys. He was known for his ruthless tactics and spotless record of victories. The judge entered the room, and the whispers ceased. Everyone stood, then sat as she took her seat. Court is now in session, she announced, her gavel striking once. This is the matter of Michael Dawson versus Victoria Hayes, regarding the legitimacy of the Dawson Enterprises inheritance and the alleged manipulation of the late Richard Dawson. We will begin with opening statements. Mr. Miller, you may proceed. Jack stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and approached the jury. His voice was calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, today we are here to uncover the truth about the untimely death of Richard Dawson, a man known for his strength, integrity, and vision. He built Dawson Enterprises from the ground up and intended for his legacy to be passed down to his only son, Michael Dawson. He paused, glancing at Victoria. But in his final months, Mr. Dawson's life took a dramatic turn. His health declined rapidly, his decisions grew erratic, and the company he built began slipping from his control. We will prove today that this was not due to natural causes or old age, but due to the calculated and deliberate manipulation of Victoria Hayes.
A murmure spread through the room, and Victoria's eyes narrowed.
Jack continued, his voice growing stronger. We have evidence, medical records showing dangerous doses of sedatives prescribed under questionable circumstances. We have testimonies from those who witnessed her control over his daily life. And we have documentation of financial transactions that suggest a conspiracy to consolidate power. Jack turned back to the judge. Today we seek justice for Richard Dawson and the rightful legacy that belongs to his son Michael. He returned to his seat, nodding confidently at Michael, who gave him a firm look of approval. The judge turned to the other side. Mr. Cross, your opening statement, please. Benjamin Cross rose gracefully, adjusting his cuffs before stepping forward. His smile was calculated, almost predatory. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice smooth and measured. What we are witnessing today is nothing more than a desperate attempt by Michael Dawson to seize power. My client, Victoria Hayes, is a devoted widow who cared for Richard Dawson in his final years. She nursed him, stood by him, and was his chosen confidant, not out of greed but out of love. He paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. The plaintiff would have you believe that Victoria manipulated Richard, that she somehow controlled his decisions. But we intend to show that Richard Dawson was of sound mind and body. He made his choices freely and with full awareness of their consequences. Cross paused, his gaze sweeping across the jury. And we will also prove that this baseless attack is motivated not by a pursuit of justice, but by Michael Dawson's own ambition and envy. He abandoned his father for years, leaving the company behind, only to return now with accusations and slander. He returned to his seat, nodding at Victoria, who gave him a confident smile.
Michael clenched his fist, Angers simmering juste benéate surface.
Ignore him, Jack whispered. We have the evidence. Let them talk. The judge straightened her glasses. We will now hear from the first witness. The court calls Mrs. Abigail Turner to the stand. Michael watched as Mrs. Turner entered the room, her steps careful and her hands clasped together nervously. She took her place at the stand, and the bailiff administered the oath. Jack approached her, offering a gentle smile. Mrs. Turner, how long did you work for the Dawson family? 22 years, she replied, her voice steady. And in those years, how would you describe Mr. Dawson's health before Victoria arrived? Mrs. Turner straightened in her seat. He was strong, healthy for his age. He would go for morning jogs, attend meetings all day without complaint. His mind was sharp. Jack nodded. And when did you first notice a change? Mrs. Turner hesitated, glancing at Victoria, who glared back with icy contempt. After she came, Mrs. Turner continued, her voice growing bolder. Victoria started bringing him tea every evening. She said it would help him sleep, but, after a few months, he began to forget things. He would get confused, lose track of conversations. He was different.
A whisper spread through the courtroom, and Jack pressed forward.
Did you ever see her add anything to that tea? Mrs. Turner nodded slowly. Yes. She would crush pills into it. She said it was his medication, but I never saw those pills prescribed before. Jack held up a file. These are Mr. Dawson's medical records. They show an increase in heavy sedatives prescribed by Dr. Simon Harris. Was he aware of these changes? Mrs. Turner's voice wavered. I don't know. But he trusted her. He always trusted her. Jack turned to the jury. No further questions, Your Honor. Benjamin Cross rose from his seat, his expression calculated. Mrs. Turner, you were dismissed from your position, correct? Mrs. Turner nodded. Yes. And that was under Victoria Hayes' orders, correct? Yes. Cross leaned in, his voice softening. Do you have any reason to hold a grudge against Mrs. Hayes? Perhaps, revenge for losing your job? Mrs. Turner's eyes flashed with indignation. I am here because Mr. Dawson deserved better. He deserved to be protected.
Cross smirked, turning back to the jury.
No further questions, Your Honor.
À mi-6. Turner left the stand, Michael's eyes locked onto Victoria's.
She smirked at him, unshaken by the testimony. But Michael saw it, the flicker of fear behind her confidence. He leaned over to Jack and whispered, We need more. We need Dr. Harris. Jack nodded. We'll get him. I promise. Michael sat back, his fists clenched in resolve.
The war had only just begun.
Michael paced back and forth in Jack Miller's office, his footsteps heavy against the polished wooden floor. The testimony from Mrs. Turner had been powerful, but it wasn't enough. Victoria's attorney, Benjamin Cross, had expertly twisted her words, casting doubt on her motives. They needed more than suspicions and witness accounts. They needed solid proof, something undeniable. Jack leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen thoughtfully. We need Dr. Harris, he said firmly. If anyone knows what Victoria was giving your father, it's him. Michael stopped pacing and turned to face Jack. I tried to talk to him before, Michael replied. He wouldn't say a word. He claimed doctor-patient confidentiality. Jack raised an eyebrow. Maybe he needs a little more persuasion.
Michael's eyes narrowed. You mean legal persuasion?
Jack smirked.
Something like that.
2 hours later, Michael and Jack stood outside the sleek glass doors of Harris Medical Group, a pristine clinic nestled in the heart of Manhattan. The reception area was immaculate, with marble floors and modern decor. A young receptionist greeted them with a polished smile.
Good afternoon.
Do you have an appointment? Jack stepped forward, flashing his badge. Jack Miller, attorney at law. We need to speak with Dr. Harris. It's a legal matter.
The receptionist's smile faltered.
Dr. Harris is currently with a patient. I'm afraid you'll have to wait. Michael stepped up, his expression hard. We're not leaving until we speak with him. The woman hesitated but picked up the phone, murmuring softly. After a moment, she nodded. He'll be with you shortly. They waited in silence, the clock ticking loudly in the spacious room. Michael's fists clenched and unclenched as he replayed Mrs. Turner's words in his mind. If Harris had been prescribing sedatives under Victoria's influence, then he was just as responsible. Finally, Dr. Simon Harris emerged from the back hallway, his white coat pristine, his hair perfectly styled. He was the picture of professionalism, but Michael could see the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. Gentlemen, Harris greeted, extending a hand. I wasn't expecting visitors. Michael ignored the hand, his gaze piercing. We need to talk. Now. Dr. Harris glanced around nervously. Of course. Follow me. They entered his office, a spacious room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Harris closed the door behind them, his hands shaking slightly. What is this about? He asked, his voice straining to remain calm. Jack stepped forward, placing a stack of documents on the desk. These are Mr. Richard Dawson's medical records, Jack began. They show consistent prescriptions of heavy sedatives, diazepam, lorazepam, and temazepam, over a 2-year period. All signed off by you. Dr. Harris swallowed hard. Yes, I was his physician. He suffered from anxiety and insomnia. The prescriptions were necessary.
Michael's eyes flashed with anger.
He wasn't suffering from anything before Victoria showed up. You started doping him up the moment she married him. Harris straightened, his voice defensive. Mr. Dawson requested those medications himself. I merely followed his wishes. Jack leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Cut the crap, Harris.
We have witnesses, people who saw Victoria preparing his drinks, crushing pills into them.
You're a complice.
That makes you an accessory. If you think we won't take this to the DA, you're gravely mistaken. Harris's hands trembled as he adjusted his glasses. You can't prove that.
Michael stepped closer, his voice dangerously low.
Try me.
The room grew silent, tension heavy in the air.
Harris glanced nervously at the door, then back at Michael and Jack. His shoulders sagged. Look, he whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't have a choice. She threatened me. She said if I didn't do as she asked, she'd destroy my practice. Ruin me. Jack raised an eyebrow. So you agreed to poison him? Harris shook his head violently. No. It wasn't poison. It was just heavy sedation. Enough to make him compliant. She wanted control, over him, over the company. I just wrote the prescriptions. She handled the rest. Michael's jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. You're just as guilty, he spat. You let her manipulate him. You let her destroy him. Harris looked down, his hands shaking. I'm sorry, he murmured, barely audible. I never wanted it to go this far.
He tugged.
I thought she just wanted influence. I didn't know she'd kill him. Jack exchanged a glance with Michael. We're going to need a statement, Jack said firmly. Full testimony, signed and notarized. You're going to tell the court exactly what happened. Harris hesitated, his eyes darting between the two men.
If you do that, she'll destroy me.
Michael stepped forward, his voice like steel. If you don't, I will.
And I promise you, Harris, you don't want me coming after you.
Dr. Harris's shoulders slumped in defeat. He reached into his drawer, pulling out a small folder. This is everything, he whispered, sliding it across the desk. Medical records, email exchanges. She made me keep him sedated, vulnerable. She controlled his diet, his schedule. I did everything she asked. Michael snatched the folder, flipping it open. His eyes scanned the pages, dosage reports, signed prescriptions, private correspondence. Jack leaned over, his voice low.
This is enough.
We can nail her with this. Michael closed the folder, his eyes hardening. It's not enough, he said coldly. Jack raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Michael's gaze turned to Harris, his expression unyielding. We need you to testify. In court. Under oath. Harris's face went pale. I can't. She'll
do nothing, Michael interrupted.
Because by the time we're done, she'll be in prison where she belongs. Dr. Harris stared at Michael, his hands trembling. After a long silence, he nodded slowly. Okay, he whispered.
Elle do it.
Michael turned to Jack, his eyes blazing with determination. Set it up. We're taking her down. Jack nodded, his smile triumphant.
He'll make the call. This ends now.
As they left Harris's office, Michael stepped out onto the bustling streets of Manhattan, the noise of the city swirling around him. For the first time in weeks, he felt hope, real, tangible hope. His father's legacy would be restored. Victoria would pay for what she'd done. Michael looked up at the towering skyline, his fists clenched with resolve. This is for you, Dad, he whispered. I promise I won't stop until justice is served. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back walls, cameras flashing as Michael Dawson entered, flanked by Jack Miller and two other associates. He walked with confidence, his shoulders squared, his face a mask of determination. Today was the day he would face Victoria Hayes head-on, armed with the truth and the evidence they had uncovered. Across the aisle, Victoria sat composed, dressed impeccably in a charcoal gray suit. Her expression was serene, almost amused, as if the entire trial were a formality. Beside her sat Benjamin Cross, his gaze sharp and unyielding. He whispered something into her ear, and she smiled slightly, never taking her eyes off Michael. The judge, an elderly woman with silver hair tied neatly in a bun, entered the room. The courtroom fell silent as she took her seat and struck the gavel. Court is now in session, she declared. We will proceed with the matter of Michael Dawson versus Victoria Hayes. Today, we will begin with the testimony of Dr. Simon Harris. Whispers rippled through the room as Dr. Harris was called to the stand. He walked nervously, his hands clasped tightly together, sweat beading on his forehead. He took his oath, his voice trembling slightly, and sat down, glancing nervously at Victoria, who returned his look with a cold, piercing glare. Jack approached the witness stand, his demeanor calm and steady. "Dr. Harris," he began, "you were Richard Dawson's personal physician for nearly 10 years, is that correct?" "Yes," Harris replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "And during that time, you were responsible for his medical treatments and prescriptions?" "Yes." Jack paced slowly in front of the jury. "Dr. Harris, can you tell the court about the medications you prescribed for Mr. Dawson in the last 2 years of his life?" Harris hesitated, his eyes flicking to Victoria once more. Jack stepped forward, blocking his view. "Please, Dr. Harris."
The truth.
Harris swallowed hard. I prescribed him sedatives. High doses of diazepam, lorazepam, and temazepam." "And why did you prescribe such strong medications to a man who had previously been in good health?" Jack asked, his voice firm.
Harris en trembled.
"I was instructed to," he whispered. "By whom?" A silence settled over the courtroom. Harris closed his eyes, as if summoning the courage. Finally, he spoke.
By Victoria et. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom.
Victoria's expression remained impassive, but her fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Benjamin Cross leaned in, whispering urgently, but she merely shook her head. Jack continued, his voice rising with intensity. "Dr. Harris, are you saying that Victoria Hayes instructed you to sedate Mr. Dawson without his consent?" "Yes," Harris replied, his eyes fixed on the floor. "She said it was to help him sleep, to keep him calm. But the doses, they were far more than necessary." Jack stepped back, his eyes sweeping over the jury. "And did you ever question her orders?" Harris hesitated. I did once. But she threatened me. She said if I didn't cooperate, she would ruin my career. She had the connections, the influence. I couldn't risk it."
Jack walked closer to the stand.
"And what happened to Mr. Dawson's health as a result of these medications?" Harris's voice broke slightly. "He got worse. He became forgetful, disoriented. He couldn't remember simple things. His strength faded. He started missing meetings, forgetting important details. It was like watching him fade away." Jack turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Matthews nodded, turning her gaze to the defense.
"Monsieur Cross, your witness."
Benjamin Cross stood gracefully, buttoning his suit jacket as he approached Dr. Harris. His smile was charming but thin. "Dr. Harris," he began, his voice dripping with smoothness, "how long have you been practicing medicine?" 30 years, Harris replied. "And in those 30 years, have you ever been accused of malpractice?"
No. Cross passed slowly. So you're a reputable doctor, respected in your field.
Yes. And yet, you claim that you allowed a woman with no medical training to dictate how you treated one of your most important patients? Harris swallowed, his eyes flickering nervously. I was under pressure." Cross's smile widened. "Pressure? So what you're saying is that you, a respected doctor of 30 years, were bullied into overdosing your patient? That's your testimony."
Harris s'en shook.
She threatened me." "Threatened you," Cross repeated, his voice mocking.
Doctor.
"Harris, is it true that you recently renovated your practice? That you expanded your facilities and upgraded your equipment?" Harris blinked, startled by the question. "Yes, that's true." Cross flipped open a folder, holding up a document. "And is it also true that these renovations were funded by an undisclosed investor? One who paid nearly $5 million to your clinic last year alone?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. Michael's eyes shot to Jack, who whispered under his breath, "Damn it, she's got him."
Cross stepped closer to Harris.
"Who paid for those renovations, Dr. Harris?" Harris hesitated, his gaze darting around the room.
I don't know."
Cross raised an eyebrow.
"You don't know?"
$5 million appeared in your account, and you don't know who sent it." Harris looked down, sweat dripping from his brow. It was arranged through a third party." Cross smirked. "A third party," he echoed, turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are to believe that Dr. Harris, a respected physician, simply received millions of dollars from an unknown source, while simultaneously prescribing dangerous levels of medication to Mr. Dawson. Does that seem plausible? The jury murmured amongst themselves, doubt beginning to creep in. Cross turned back to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Judge Matthews nodded. The witness is dismissed. As Dr. Harris stepped down, his face pale and drained, Michael leaned over to Jack. What the hell was that? He just collapsed out there. Jack's face was grim. It's clear she paid him off. He's terrified of her. That $5 million was hush money. Michael's fists clenched. We're not done yet. She's not getting away with this. Jack nodded. We still have Mrs. Turner, and we still have the documents we recovered from Harris's office. But we need to be smarter.
Cross is good, too good.
Michael's eyes burned with determination as he stared across the room at Victoria. She met his gaze, unblinking, a smirk curling her lips. Michael took a deep breath, his hands steadying. Next time, he whispered, we bury her. The air in the courtroom was tense, heavy with anticipation. The testimony of Dr. Harris had shaken the foundation of Michael's case. Victoria Hayes sat with her chin held high, her confidence seemingly unshaken. Michael watched her from across the aisle, his jaw clenched tightly. He knew they needed something big, something irrefutable, to turn the tide back in their favor. Jack Miller straightened his tie and turned to Michael. Are you ready for this? He asked, his voice low. Michael nodded firmly. I've been ready since the day she stole my father's legacy. Jack stepped forward, his shoes clicking sharply against the marble floor. He faced the judge with a confident stance. Your Honor, the prosecution would like to call a new witness to the stand. The judge raised an eyebrow. This witness wasn't disclosed in the pretrial. Jack smiled faintly.
That is correct, Your Honor.
This witness only came forward recently after hearing Dr. Harris's testimony. We believe her information is both relevant and crucial to the case. Victoria's eyes narrowed, and Benjamin Cross stood up abruptly.
Objection, Your Honor.
This is clearly a last-minute ploy to disrupt the defense. We have a right to be informed of all witnesses prior to the hearing. Judge Matthews tapped her gavel lightly. Noted, Mr. Cross. But if this witness has pertinent information, I am willing to allow it. Proceed, Mr. Miller. Who is this witness? Jack turned towards the double doors at the back of the courtroom. The prosecution calls Nina Clark to the stand. A hush fell over the room as the doors opened, and a woman stepped inside. She was in her late 30s, tall and poised, with sharp green eyes and neatly tied blonde hair. She walked confidently to the witness stand, her heels clicking in the silence. She was sworn in, and Jack approached her with measured steps. Ms. Clark, Jack began, his voice calm and steady, can you please tell the court what your role was at Dawson Mansion? Nina glanced at Victoria, whose expression had turned stone cold. I was Mr. Dawson's private nurse, Nina replied. I was hired by Mrs. Hayes to look after him during the last year of his life.
Un murmure spread through the courtroom. Michael's eyes widened slightly.
He had never known his father had a private nurse. He leaned towards Jack. Did you know about this? Jack shook his head subtly. First I'm hearing of it, he whispered back. Jack cleared his throat and continued. Ms. Clark, can you explain to the jury what your responsibilities were? Nina nodded. I was tasked with administering his medication, monitoring his health, and reporting back to Mrs. Hayes directly. I lived on site, in the guest house on the property. Jack's eyebrows rose. You lived there? Full-time? Yes, Nina confirmed. I was not allowed to leave without permission from Mrs. Hayes. She said it was to ensure Mr. Dawson had consistent care. Jack paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. Did you ever witness Mrs. Hayes giving Mr. Dawson medication outside of your supervision? Nina hesitated, glancing nervously at Victoria, whose gaze was fixed and unblinking. Jack took a step closer, his voice softening. Ms. Clark, you're under oath. Whatever you say here is protected by the court.
You need to tell the truth.
Nina took a deep breath, her eyes dropping to her hands. Yes, she whispered. I saw her. Many times. A ripple of shock spread through the audience. Victoria's face remained expressionless, but her knuckles were white against the edge of the table. Jack leaned in, his voice firm. "What did you see, Ms. Clark?" Nina looked up, her gaze steady. "I saw Mrs. Hayes crush pills and add them to Mr. Dawson's drinks. Tea mostly. Sometimes his evening whiskey. She said it was just his medication, but the doses, they were far too high." Jack turned to the jury. "Did you ever question her about it?" "I did," Nina replied, her voice shaking slightly. "I asked her once if it was safe, and she told me to mind my own business. She said if I wanted to keep my job, I would do as I was told." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And did you continue?" Nina nodded slowly. "I needed the money. I didn't know how bad it was until the last month." Jack's gaze sharpened. "The last month? What happened?" Nina took a deep breath, her hands clasping together tightly. Mr. Dawson became unresponsive. He would sit in his chair for hours, not speaking, just staring into space. When I tried to help him up, he could barely walk. He was like a shell. Michael swallowed hard, his fists clenching under the table. Memories of his father, once powerful and commanding, now reduced to a frail shadow of himself, flashed through his mind. Jack turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I would like to submit into evidence a logbook recovered from Ms. Clark's belongings. It is a record of the medications administered to Mr. Dawson, along with notes on his condition." Benjamin Cross shot to his feet. "Objection. This evidence is being introduced without proper chain of custody." Jack didn't flinch. "The logbook is signed and dated by Ms. Clark herself. She was his nurse. This is a first-hand account of Mr. Dawson's deterioration." The judge looked over the papers Jack presented, nodding slightly. "I'll allow it." Objection overruled. Cross seethed, sitting back down with a clenched jaw. Jack returned his attention to Nina. "Ms. Clark, one final question," he began, his voice clear. "Why did you decide to come forward now?" Nina looked directly at Michael, her eyes brimming with regret. "Because he deserves the truth," she replied, her voice cracking. "And because I couldn't live with it anymore. What she did, it was wrong. She isolated him, controlled him, and when he got too weak to fight back, she made sure no one could help him." Michael's heart pounded in his chest. For the first time since the trial began, he felt the walls closing in on Victoria. He looked across the room and met her eyes. Her expression was still as cold as ever, but there was a flicker of something else, fear. Jack turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Matthews nodded.
The witness may step down. Nina rose from the chair, casting one last glance at Victoria before walking away.
Michael watched her go, his mind racing. They were finally getting somewhere. As the gavel struck, the judge announced a recess. The crowd murmured with excitement and tension, the whispers growing louder as Michael stood and straightened his suit. He turned to Jack. "We've got her." Jack nodded, a grin spreading across his face.
"This is just the beginning.
Now we finish it." The courtroom was packed to capacity, the tension thick and suffocating. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras poised, waiting to capture every reaction, every flicker of emotion that might give away the outcome of one of New York's most gripping legal battles. Michael Dawson sat rigidly in his chair, his eyes fixed on the judge's bench, his fingers interlaced tightly. Jack Miller sat beside him, his briefcase filled with documents, his expression resolute. Across the aisle, Victoria Hayes maintained her usual poise, dressed impeccably in a tailored navy suit. Her expression was serene, but Michael could see the faintest hint of tension in the way her hands clutched the edge of the table. Benjamin Cross whispered something to her, but she merely nodded, her gaze fixed forward.
The gavel struck echoing through the room.
Judge Matthews, stern and composed, cleared her throat. "This court has heard the testimonies, reviewed the evidence, and deliberated on the claims presented. Today, we will render the verdict in the matter of Michael Dawson versus Victoria Hayes regarding the manipulation and unlawful acquisition of Dawson Enterprises assets." A hush fell over the room. Michael held his breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He had fought for weeks, clawed through lies and deceit, but everything came down to this moment. Judge Matthews continued. The prosecution has presented substantial evidence indicating manipulation and medical malpractice facilitated by Dr. Simon Harris under the instruction of Mrs. Victoria Hayes. The testimony of Ms. Nina Clark, corroborated by detailed medical logs and financial records, suggests deliberate attempts to weaken Mr. Richard Dawson's mental and physical state through unauthorized sedation.
Michael S. fist clenched bonnet à the table.
He could feel Jack's hand grip his shoulder in silent encouragement. The judge paused, adjusting her glasses. Furthermore, financial records submitted as evidence indicate large sums of money transferred to Dr. Harris's private practice, coinciding with the time of Mr. Dawson's deteriorating health. These transactions were executed through offshore accounts linked directly to Mrs. Hayes.
A wave of murmur rippled through the courtroom.
Benjamin Cross stood, his voice sharp.
Objection, Your Honor.
These financial records are circumstantial at best. They do not directly link Mrs. Hayes to any criminal activity. Judge Matthews raised a hand, silencing him immediately. The objection is noted, Mr. Cross. However, the court finds the evidence compelling enough to be included in our deliberation. The pattern of financial influence, combined with medical malpractice, paints a picture that this court cannot ignore. Michael felt a surge of hope rise in his chest. He glanced at Victoria, whose expression had hardened, her eyes fixed forward, unblinking. For the first time, her confidence seemed shaken. Judge Matthews straightened her papers and continued, "This court also takes into consideration the will signed by Mr. Dawson, which transferred control of Dawson Enterprises to Mrs. Hayes. Testimonies from multiple witnesses, including Mrs. Abigail Turner and Ms. Nina Clark, suggest that Mr. Dawson was not in a clear state of mind during the signing of these documents. Coupled with evidence of medical sedation, this court finds sufficient grounds to question the legitimacy of the will."
A gasp spread through the room.
Michael felt his breath catch, his eyes wide with disbelief. He turned to Jack, who gave him a triumphant nod. "We've got her," Jack whispered. Judge Matthews picked up her gavel. "It is the ruling of this court that the will of Richard Dawson is hereby declared null and void, pending further investigation into the circumstances of its signing. Control of Dawson Enterprises will revert to its original terms as per the previous will, designating Michael Dawson as the rightful heir and executor." The room exploded into whispers and gasps. Reporters scrambled to take notes, and flashes of cameras lit up the courtroom. Michael's heart pounded with exhilaration, relief flooding over him like a wave. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring the victory. His father's legacy was back where it belonged. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Judge Matthews raised her hand, silencing the room. "Furthermore, the court is issuing an order for the immediate investigation of Mrs. Victoria Hayes and Dr. Simon Harris for conspiracy, medical malpractice, and attempted unlawful seizure of assets. Mrs. Hayes, you are hereby ordered to surrender your passport and remain within the jurisdiction until further notice."
Victoria's face blanched.
The color drained from her cheeks as she turned to Benjamin Cross, whose expression had shifted from confident to alarmed. He whispered something urgently to her, but she ignored him, her eyes locking with Michael's across the room. Michael met her gaze, his expression resolute. For a moment, neither of them moved. The weight of years of manipulation and betrayal hung heavy between them. Finally, Victoria's lips curled into a cold smile, one that spoke not of surrender but of defiance. She mouthed something silently, her eyes never leaving his. "This isn't over." Michael didn't flinch. He mouthed back, his voice silent but clear. "Yes, it is." Security approached Victoria's table, standing by as she collected her things. She moved slowly, deliberately, her eyes scanning the room as if seeking a way out. But there was none. She was trapped. As she was escorted from the courtroom, Michael watched her go, his expression unyielding. Jack leaned over, patting him on the back. "We did it," he said, his voice filled with triumph.
Michael shook his head slowly.
"Not yet," he replied, his eyes still fixed on the doors where Victoria had disappeared. "She's not going to go down without a fight."
Jacques' smile faded.
"You think she's got something up her sleeve?" Michael nodded. "I know she does."
Victoria de Saint-Eloise. Not like this.
Jack rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "We'll be ready for her." Michael finally allowed himself a small smile. "Damn right we will. Because this time, we're not stopping until she's finished." Outside, Reporters clamored for interviews, microphones shoved towards Michael as he exited the building. But he ignored them, his focus unyielding. He had reclaimed his father's legacy, but there was still one last battle to fight. He knew Victoria Hayes wouldn't go down quietly, and Michael Dawson had no intention of backing off. As he stepped into the sunlight, Michael took a deep breath, his fists clenched with renewed determination. For his father.
For Dawson Enterprises.
And for the truth.
The sun cast long shadow over the towering glass facade of Dawson Enterprises, reflecting the bustling street of Manhattan.
For the first time in years, Michael Dawson stepped through the grand entrance of his father's empire not as an outsider, but as its rightful leader. The marble floors gleamed under the sunlight, and the reception area buzzed with activity. Employees glanced up as he walked past, their eyes filled with curiosity and cautious hope. Jack Miller walked beside him, his expression stern but satisfied. "It's good to see you back where you belong," he remarked as they stepped into the private elevator that led to the executive floors. Michael nodded, his gaze fixed ahead. "I promised my father I'd take this back," he replied firmly. "But we're not done yet. Victoria is still out there." Jack sighed, adjusting his tie. "Her assets are frozen, her passport is confiscated, and the investigation is underway. I doubt she can do much damage now."
Michael shook his head.
"You don't know her like I do. She's not the type to fade into the background." The elevator chimed softly, and the doors slid open, revealing the vast expanse of the executive floor. Glass walls stretched from floor to ceiling, offering a panoramic view of the New York skyline. Michael stepped out, taking in the familiar sights of polished wood, leather furnishings, and the portraits of his father that still hung on the walls. "Welcome back, Mr. Dawson," a voice chimed from behind the reception desk. It was Sarah, his father's longtime assistant, her eyes misty with emotion. Michael walked over, shaking her hand warmly. "Good to see you, Sarah."
"I'm glad you're still here."
She smiled, wiping away a tear. "Your father would be so proud." Michael's expression softened. "Thank you. We've got a lot of work to do."
"Let's get started."
He and Jack moved into the boardroom, where a group of senior executives were already seated, their expressions a mixture of relief and anticipation. Michael took his place at the head of the long oak table, his fingers grazing the polished surface that his father once commanded with authority. Jack opened his briefcase, distributing files to the executives. "First order of business," Jack began, his voice firm. "Re-establishing trust with our partners. During Victoria's reign, several long-term contracts were severed, and investments were mismanaged. We need to rebuild those relationships." Michael nodded. "We'll start with our biggest partners. Set up meetings with the heads of Sterling Financial, Mason and Company, and the international investors in Europe.
You want face-to-face discussion.
They need to know that Dawson Enterprises is back under proper leadership." The executives murmured in agreement, scribbling notes and nodding as Michael continued. "Next, I want a full audit of all finances from the past 3 years.
Every transaction, every acquisition, every partnership.
I want transparency, and I want accountability." Jack added, "We've already begun the investigation. Preliminary reports suggest significant sums were funneled into private accounts offshore, accounts linked to shell companies under Victoria's name." Michael's jaw clenched.
You want it all frozen. Every last cent.
"And I want legal action prepared. We're going after every dime she stole from this company." A ripple of approval spread across the room. For the first time in months, hope was returning to the walls of Dawson Enterprises. But as the meeting continued, Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the fight was far from over. When the executives finally departed, Jack remained, closing the boardroom door behind him. He took a seat across from Michael, his expression more serious than before. "You know she's not going to take this lying down," Jack said quietly. Michael leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled together. "I'm counting on it," he replied.
Victoria never back off.
"She always fights back. That's when she makes mistakes." Jack raised an eyebrow. "You think she still has a move left?" Michael nodded. "She always has a move left." Just as the words left his mouth, Jack's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, his eyes narrowing. "It's the investigator," he said, answering the call.
This is Jack Miller.
There was a pause, and Jack's expression turned grave. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper.
Michael leaned forward. "What is it?"
Jack held up a finger, listening intently.
Understood.
"Send me everything you have." He ended the call, his eyes meeting Michael's. "We've got a problem."
Michael's eyes darkened.
"What kind of problem?" Jack took a deep breath. "Victoria's been busy." The investigators found evidence of her contacting multiple international firms, real estate brokers, private bankers, even a few names tied to offshore asset transfers. Michael frowned. "What is she doing?" Jack slid a folder across the table. "Setting up a new base of operations." The investigators traced several transactions to properties in Dubai, Singapore, and Zurich. "She's moving assets, and people." Michael opened the folder, scanning through the documents. "She's trying to rebuild," he murmured. "Even after everything, she still has resources." Jack nodded. "More than we thought. If she gets those assets moved, it'll be almost impossible to seize them under U.S. jurisdiction."
Michael's enclenched the edge of the table.
"We need to stop her. Freeze every account linked to her name."
"I don't care what it takes, lock it all down." Jack's eyes shone with determination.
"I'll get the paperwork started." "But Michael." Michael looked up. "What?" Jack hesitated. "If she's setting up offshore, she's planning for a comeback. This isn't just about money. She's getting ready for war." Michael's gaze hardened. "Then we'll be ready. This time, I'm not just going to win. I'm going to bury her legacy so deep she won't ever crawl back out." Jack stood, his expression resolute. "I'll make the calls. We're going global on this one." Michael nodded, his eyes never leaving the view of the city skyline.
"We fight fire with fire. If she want a war, I'm ready."
As Jack left the room, Michael stood alone, his hands pressed against the glass, eyes scanning the towering buildings of Manhattan. He could feel it, a storm brewing, darker and more dangerous than anything he had faced before. But this time, he was ready. Victoria Hayes had made her move. Now it was his turn.
The rain fell in relentless sheet, drumming against the glass walls of Michael's corner office at Dawson Enterprises.
The city skyline blurred behind the raindrops, casting long shadowy reflections onto the polished marble floors. Michael stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the storm raging outside. It was fitting, he thought. A storm to end all storms. Jack Miller entered the room, his coat dripping wet from the downpour. He tossed a stack of files onto Michael's desk, his expression grim but resolute. "It's done," Jack said, his voice cutting through the silence. "The accounts are frozen, the properties flagged. She can't move a cent without us knowing." Michael turned slowly, his expression unyielding. "And her contacts?" Jack nodded. "Cut off. I spoke with the international firms. No one is touching her assets until this is resolved. Her network is crumbling. She's isolated."
A flicker of satisfaction crossed Michael's eyes.
"Good.
She's out of move."
Jack hesitated. "Almost," he replied. "There's one more thing." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Jack pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase and handed it to Michael. "This was intercepted this morning. It's a court summons."
Michael tore it open, his eyes scanning the document.
His jaw clenched. "She's suing for damages?" he asked incredulously. Jack nodded. "She's claiming defamation, unlawful seizure of property, and wrongful termination of her stake in Dawson Enterprises. She's demanding compensation, and her seat back."
Michael looked bitterly. "She's out of her mind."
Jack's face remained stoic. "Maybe. But she's desperate."
"And desperate people do desperate things."
Michael tossed the envelope onto the desk, his gaze turning back to the storm outside.
"Then let her come."
"I'm done playing defense. This time we end it." The court date was set for the following week. News outlets buzzed with headlines of the impending battle, speculating on Victoria Hayes's audacity and Michael Dawson's determination. The day of the trial, the courtroom was overflowing with reporters and spectators, eager to witness the final clash. Victoria entered the courtroom with all the grace and poise of a queen reclaiming her throne. Her hair was pinned back meticulously, her dress immaculate. She walked with confidence, flanked by Benjamin Cross, who looked just as sharp and calculating as ever. Michael stood at the opposite end, his eyes fixed on her with unyielding resolve. Jack Miller stood beside him, stacks of documents and evidence neatly organized on the table. "She looks confident," Jack murmured. Michael didn't blink. "So do I," he replied firmly. The gavel struck, and Judge Matthews took her seat. "Court is now in session," she announced. "We are here today for the matter of Victoria Hayes versus Michael Dawson regarding alleged defamation, unlawful seizure, and corporate misconduct." Cross rose first, his smile polished and smooth. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Mrs. Hayes, has been a victim of slanderous accusations and corporate theft. Her assets have been unjustly frozen, her reputation tarnished, and her rightful place in Dawson Enterprises stripped without due process. We demand immediate restitution and the reinstatement of her position within the company." He gestured dramatically toward Victoria, who maintained her regal posture.
My client did nothing but love and support Richard Dawson.
She nurtured him, cared for him in his final days, and is now being punished for crimes she did not commit. Michael gritted his teeth, his fists clenched at his sides. Jack placed a calming hand on his shoulder. "Let him talk," he whispered. "We have our turn." The judge nodded. "Thank you, Mr. Cross. Mr. Miller, you may proceed." Jack stood, straightening his jacket before stepping forward. His voice was clear and measured. "Your Honor, the evidence we have submitted is irrefutable. We have medical records, financial statements, and testimony from multiple witnesses that prove Mrs. Hayes systematically manipulated and isolated Richard Dawson for her own financial gain." Jack paused, his eyes sweeping over the jury. "We have proof that she transferred large sums of money into offshore accounts, used heavy sedation to influence Mr. Dawson's decision-making, and orchestrated the signing of a will under questionable circumstances. This is not a case of wrongful seizure, it's a case of justice." Victoria's expression remained impassive, but Michael caught the slight twitch in her jaw. She was cracking. Slowly, but surely. The judge cleared her throat.
"Monsieur Miller, you may call your first witness."
Jack nodded. The prosecution calls Detective Harris to the stand. A murmur spread through the courtroom as the detective approached, his presence commanding respect. He was sworn in, and Jack stepped forward. "Detective, can you please tell the court what your investigation uncovered about Mrs. Hayes's financial dealings?" Harris adjusted his glasses. "Our investigation traced several offshore accounts linked directly to shell companies under Mrs. Hayes's name. These accounts were used to funnel money out of Dawson Enterprises in small, untraceable sums over the course of 2 years."
Jacques stepped closer.
"And did you find evidence of coercion or manipulation in relation to Mr. Richard Dawson's estate?" Harris nodded. "Yes. We uncovered emails and recorded phone calls between Mrs. Hayes and Dr. Simon Harris discussing increased dosages of sedatives, as well as discussions about maintaining Mr. Dawson's dependency on medication."
A gasp rippled through the courtroom.
Michael's eyes never left Victoria, whose expression remained stoic but whose hands tightened visibly on the table. Jack turned to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." Benjamin Cross approached the detective with his usual smugness. "Detective, would you say these transactions were legally executed? Was there any direct evidence of Mrs. Hayes ordering harm to Mr. Dawson?" Harris paused. "The transactions were legal, yes. But the pattern suggests." Cross cut him off. "Thank you, Detective. That's all I needed to know." The judge called for a brief recess, and the room emptied out into murmurs of disbelief and speculation. Michael remained seated, his eyes fixed on the empty witness stand. "She's still slipping through," he whispered to Jack. Jack leaned in, his voice low.
"Not for long.
I have one more witness lined up."
Someone she won't see coming."
Michael raised an eyebrow. "Who?" Jack smiled grimly. "Let's just say, an old friend of hers. Someone who knows exactly what she did." The doors reopened, and the bailiff called for order. As the judge returned to her seat, Jack rose confidently. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls its final witness."
Matthew Klein.
Victoria's face went pale. Michael's eyes shot to her, catching the flicker of terror that flashed across her eyes before she masked it with indifference. Jack leaned back, whispering to Michael, "We've got her." Michael watched as a tall man in his 40s entered the room, his hair graying at the temples, his expression cold and unyielding. He locked eyes with Victoria, and for the first time, Michael saw it, true fear. Jack leaned in. "He was her fixer," Jack murmured. "The one who did all the dirty work she never wanted traced back to her." Michael's gaze hardened. "This is it," he whispered. "This is where she falls." The courtroom fell silent, anticipation thick in the air. Matthew Klein took the stand, swore his oath, and looked directly at Victoria. "I'm here to tell the truth," he declared.
The truth about everything.
Michael leaned back in his chair, his hands clasped together, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself a smile.